All right, welcome to Roots of Reality Experiences. I'm joined by Dr. Daniel Greco, who is a professor of philosophy at Yale University. His research focuses primarily on epistemology, where he has written extensively on skepticism, the relationship between first and higher order epistemic states, and the structure of epistemic norms. Additionally, he's the author of Idealization and Epistemology, a Modest Modeling Approach. So, Dr. Greco, thanks for coming on today.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for inviting me.
So just to start off, when did you first get interested in AI and helping train, AI models? Obviously, this is something that you've written about recently, but curious to kind of know where this origin story began.
Yeah. I had been interested in the area of philosophy most relevant to this philosophy of mind for a while. And I remember I actually, I should remember exactly, but it was a few years ago, either 2023 or 2022. I was teaching a philosophy of mind class, where, like any philosophy of mind class, we're going to do a session where we read about the Turing test. We read the original Turing paper where he describes this test. And whenever I'd taught it in the past, I had them play with chatbots before. I'd had them play with the old 70s Eliza and with, ones that had come further. But when I was teaching it that time, ChatGPT came out like in the middle of the semester. And in the past, I'd always been able to say, computers, uncontroversially, unequivocally failed the Turing test, and so like, you know, you can think it's a good test or not, but still
Right.
it's a benchmark we're nowhere near. And then it felt like out of nowhere, oh, they blazed right past it. And I think I've been interested in it at least since then, which is, not that long ago.
So did you have what was your kind of like ChatGPT type moment or whatever that you're like, oh, wow, this is crazy. How advanced this is compared to what we used to know?
Yeah, I think already with GPT-3, it was pretty striking. I think that was probably when I first noticed, right? So and ChatGPT was shortly after GPT-3. I can't remember if I'd seen GPT-2, but it was like a lot worse and not that interesting. So it's still in the last I'd had a kind of generic interest in it for my whole adult life, but like specifically in large language models, yeah, that's got to date back less than 5 years.
Yeah, pretty recent. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy how much it's advanced so far. Um, so what convinced you then that, AI was something worth investing your time, as a philosopher in to kind of even train AI?
Yeah, so that it's even much more recently. It's only in the last, like I said, half year, I think,
Okay.
that
Wow.
I just started getting emails or hearing about friends. I think first I had a friend who said, "Hey, I've been." It was somebody who I was going to give a talk at his university, so we'd been chatting, and he mentioned that he'd been doing this, training AI models, and would I be interested in doing it? And like a few days after doing that and starting for this one company, I got another email from somebody else. Uh, also inviting me to do very similar work. So I was doing like very similar work through two different platforms. And then maybe another month or two after that, yet another case of, uh, these aren't all different companies. Sometimes it's middlemen, but just I was getting a lot of invitations to do it. And I was curious enough in the technology that I'd say my main motivation in agreeing was curiosity. I wanted to say like, hey, what's the process like?
So what is like the training process then? Like, what exactly do you do?
Yeah, I've had a few different versions. Sometimes there's more agency in that you're supplying prompts and then grading different responses. One version of it that maybe the kind that I liked the best was you're explicitly trying to get them to screw up.
Okay.
It turns out it's really hard. And then another version is it's more passive in that you don't reply. You choose which prompts to reply to, but the prompts have already been written by somebody else, and you're given pairs of responses that you need to make comparative judgments about. And you can just say some stuff like what's good about it, what's bad about it, but you're not deciding what topics it's going to cover, except by passing on the topics that don't interest
Right. No, that makes sense. So obviously, your recent article in Chronicle of Philanthropy, you're talking about, basically the title was pretty catching, teaching,
you.
having
Yeah, for what it's
crazy
worth, I
guy.
didn't. Yeah, I think it was something like, "I'm a philosopher. Here's why I'm training AI to replace me." I didn't write the
Yeah,
title, but it was probably good to let them write the title
yeah.
because they go for
Yeah,
clickbait.
it was definitely, yeah, clickbait for sure. I think it obviously pretty catching. So like, how true is that? Like, how do you think about AI then, and your role, and what it means in the future? When you're doing this process of training AI.
Yeah, I mean, this like just how replaceable are we? I don't. The sense in which it feels threatening, right, to me at least, is I've invested some of my like a lot of my professional identity, some of my ego in being good at engaging with philosophy via text. And so then when you see AI that's really, really good at doing that, and this is something like you've cared about being good at, that's, I don't know, I imagine it feels something like what chess players felt like once they learned they could be beaten by computers.
Right. Yeah.
Um, Now, yeah, I don't think that means immediately there's nothing for professors to do. Maybe in the long run, I think it's an interesting question whether you can come up with alternative institutions that make more use of artificial intelligence where humans use it. I'm not eager to, like I said, to be replaced in it, but
Sure.
and in the short run, like I don't think anybody really knows how you
Yeah.
do that. And
Right.
also, it's not like all of what we do is just producing responses to questions. Certainly interpersonal elements to teaching that I don't think LLMs can match yet. Like there's an analogy that I like. Um, think of like a personal trainer, in the gym. Uh, you could imagine wondering like what the point is. Like it's easy to look up, workouts and find what workouts are best. You could certainly ask an LLM what workouts are best. But I don't think anybody really expects personal trainers to be replaced. And I think part of that is because uh, a big part of what you're buying, it's not just like the information, which maybe you could get in a more impersonal way. It's that there's an interpersonal element, right? You want somebody who you care about disappointing, like where you'd feel kind of guilty if you didn't show up for your workout, where you'd like to impress them. And I'm inclined to think even before AI, a large part of what colleges provide is something analogous to personal trainers, but for intellectual work, right? Like the
Mm,
books have always been there. An autodidact could always go and read the books, but without the kind of institutional structure of like someplace where you'd feel guilty if you didn't show up. And then once you showed up, you'd feel embarrassed if you seemed to not know what you were talking about. Like, I think you're paying a lot for that. And that's something that AI can't yet replicate.
yeah. I mean, I guess a big part of education, or working with personal trainer, is that human element of relatability that you don't really get from just talking to an AI model. And given that we are human beings, it's going to take probably some time for it to get to the point where people are like, "Oh, I would actually rather, just spend all my time interacting with the chatbot." Uh,
Yeah. So on the teaching side, I don't think we're replaceable yet. But like a lot of us really, care about the writing side. We're like professionally, we're more selected for our writing
yeah,
than for our teaching. And there, it's threatening to feel like, oh, I thought this was, a distinctive skill that I had that I could, answer this tricky question that most people couldn't. And now if I find, no, it's really hard to come up with questions like that. Anything you think was impressive for you to have been able to answer it, Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT
yeah.
will do a good job.
It does seem like it's going to be, yeah, changing the writing process quite a bit, where it's more like you're an editor of your own ideas while it's writing your ideas for you, kind of, to a certain extent.
I mean, I yeah, I'll certainly say my outlining process. Like I still don't like its writing voice that much, but my outlining process now is much more like I'll start with a kind of jumble of ideas and say, look, I know I want to say all this stuff,
Yeah,
but in the past it would be hard to get from there to writing
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Whereas now I'll just write it up as a kind of big disorganized prompt and start a conversation, and that will do a much better job of like getting me to the point where I feel like, okay, here's what I want to say in what order.
yeah.
Then in the past, what I would have done is I'd probably give a talk or but it's you got to wait a long time before you can present material in front of an audience.
Sure. So, like, does this change of you all of a sudden, incorporating AI into your life. You're training it. You're obviously using it. You know, is it kind of spooky at times when you reflect back on what your career was like, 10 years ago now to today, and you're like, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it still feels a bit early to feel all that different. Like one thing I wonder is if we get to the point where you really can write whole papers, not
Yeah.
like undergraduate papers, but
Right,
papers
right. Like a
that you'd
real
submit to
academic.
journals,
Yeah.
which for what it's worth, I don't think we're there yet. Then will we say, well, what are we even doing writing papers? Like, half the point of that um, was, I mean, part of it you might think was to add to knowledge, but also part of it was to prove something, right? They're used for hiring and promotion. And I could easily imagine getting to a point where we think, well, we just care a lot less about the academic paper now that academic papers are not useful for hiring and promotion. That would feel like a really different world, though I don't think
Yeah.
we're there yet.
And I wonder then, like, so what is the thing that determines who gets promoted or whatnot if there are no academic papers? Is it just like teaching ability or like?
Yeah, I mean, one possibility. One possibility, and the reason I'm thinking this is that this is sort of the direction that I'm planning to go next year in grading. And I feel like we're all reacting in real time in grading. So I don't know what we're going to do collectively, whether this thing I'm going to do next year, I'll keep doing the year after, but is relying more on oral assessments.
Yeah,
So
that makes
I
sense.
will have students write a paper, but everybody will be interviewed after the paper. And the
Mm.
interview won't be trying to catch you out to see whether you used AI. I'm not going to try and police AI use because I don't trust my ability to
Yeah,
decide what counts as good, either to
that's true.
distinguish between people who used it and people who didn't, or to decide, what kind of use is too much
Yeah,
and what kind of
you're
use is
pretty
okay.
complicated fast. Yeah,
Yeah, but I do want to say, well, the way that I'm going to figure out whether you've, mastered the material is after you turn in a paper, I'll kind of grill you on it. And if there are really interesting things in the paper where when I like push you a bit further, you can't do anything with them, then does that mean you wrote it with AI? I don't know. Maybe it just means you're not good on your feet. But that's but now we're testing.
yeah. This is
I
the
feel like I can't
yeah.
help but test for people being good on their feet to try and test for whether they over relied on AI.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's obviously still a good skill. Like, if you're actually confronted on a topic where you need to talk about it in real life, not just write about, can you do that? It's still an important skill to have. So that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel genuinely conflicted because I can think of people I've known, teachers I've had who weren't so good on their feet.
Yeah. That's
Uh, and maybe people like that will have a harder time in the future where we we can't help but in trying to test for how well you've internalized something, test for speed.
yeah.
Um, and the reason that just doesn't make me think that's the wrong thing to do is that I feel like there aren't going to be any perfect assessment procedures.
Yeah. I mean, are there professors that are just doing kind of like the old fashioned, in class essay or something like that?
Yeah, my main reason for not wanting to go to blue books is I just find student handwriting incomprehensible.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
and,
true.
and
Yeah.
look, sometimes some of them write so that you can read it, but plenty of them write so that you can't read it. I also think that they just write uh, probably less and worse when you have to handwrite. Like not being able
Yeah.
to
That's
delete things
definitely
and move them around, it's such a
right.
big handicap.
Yeah.
But you can do uh, actually what I did last semester was I had them do an in-class exam where they typed it and I kind of stood over their shoulders in the room, making sure they were in the right
Yeah. Yeah.
environment. Um, and yeah, I think that was okay too. The downside there is like what I always liked about the paper was that you could have somebody like produce something that required thought over a long period of time, and an in-class exam just can't test for the same stuff. Right, you can't ask somebody to come up with an argument that takes pages and pages to develop.
Sure. Well, I guess you could always go back to the typewriter in class, or maybe there's computers that could be just like school computers that only allow you to just use like a Word document without anything else installed on it or something.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and then I think you'd also just want to have a lot more. Like if you really wanted something analogous to the old papers, then I think you'd want to give people a lot of time with those.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to see and just, hear about all the different people trying to navigate, like, how AI has upended the grading system. Um, but, thinking back then to your training with AI, like, what has been the reaction of, like, sort of other philosophers in your field about the idea of you training AI in philosophy? Do they feel like, like, "What are you doing? You're on that
Yeah,
other team now or something?" Or what?
I mean, it's recent enough that I feel like uh, I haven't gotten a ton of reactions, but certainly a colleague of mine is planning to write a negative letter to the editor. I mean,
Okay.
they're friendly. They shared it with me
Right,
first,
right.
but
Yeah.
but so I definitely have some colleagues who don't like it. I have another colleague of mine who um just wrote back saying, like, I just had a 2 hour conversation about political theory and Kant with Claude, and it was great. Maybe I should thank you. um, uh,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, my sense is people have they vary a lot in their attitudes towards the technology.
Yeah. I mean, as a philosopher though, like, to a certain extent, do you just feel like, obviously it's an adjustment process for anyone to kind of deal with how AI is changing society, but also to a certain extent, like, this is the new world that people need to just kind of adapt to a certain extent as well.
I think that's definitely part of it. Yeah, because I'm certainly open to the thought that if I could, snap my fingers and make it, impossible for students to use AI in college, or at least in certain classes in college, you know, maybe that would be better. But we can't. And There's a point that I made in the essay. Like, I tend to think given that we're not putting the genie back in the bottle, the ceiling for, like, how much good you can do if what it's capable of gets better than what it is. I think that's maybe more affected than how much bad you can do. Again, just
Yeah.
sticking to the philosophy context, right? There's worries about bad, like all sorts of bad uses, but just thinking about philosophy, I feel like the good uses, they're very numerous. If you're interested in philosophy, you're trying to understand philosophy itself better, or I gave these other contexts where you're just asking for the sort of clarification that a philosopher can provide. Um, I think the better it is, uh, the better it can do these helpful things. Whereas with the bad use, meaning basically, not doing work for class, I think it's already good enough to do that. And so you may as well hope that it improves, because that's not going to make the cheating substantially worse. We'll have to figure out ways to deal with the cheating, but the genie's out of the bottle enough that even if it doesn't get any better than it is now, it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that, like, with any technology, if someone actually wants to just learn stuff, then technology can be a great advantage. Um, and if someone actually isn't inclined to learn much, then maybe it wasn't really the technology necessarily that was always the problem. For example,
Yeah, I think that, and this is why I think talking about the effect
yeah,
on teaching is misleading, because I think it'll
yeah,
have very different effects on
of
different
course,
students depending on their background motivations, right? So yeah, I think for the more like intrinsically motivated students, it will extend their reach. It'll extend what they can do. For the people who are taking a class because they need a distribution requirement, or they need to graduate, and this looked like the least painful way of filling a credit hour, then they'll probably get less out of it than or less out of classes than they might have in the past. Uh, and maybe it just makes like forcing people to take classes
right, yeah,
harder than it was in the
yeah.
past.
Yeah, well, I guess the other thing is, like, obviously, no one wants to just wreck the education system with AI and have it kind of bulldoze, the whole system. But it may also do some good in terms, I guess, it can kind of highlight maybe some things we weren't doing well enough. Obviously, there's way too many classes that people will take in college or high school or anything else where it's just kind of like, okay, you just regurgitate information for a test and you don't actually, take that with you later on. You just forget it immediately. How do we prevent that type of, uh, you know, kind of pseudo learning almost, because people aren't really learning. They're just trying to play a game kind of with the system.
Yeah, I know there's very depressing research on what gets called transfer of learning, like how well, if you learn something in one context, how well
Right.
will you do it applying it in other contexts, and especially over time.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I'm sort of tempted to think to the extent that transfer of learning goes poorly when, well, maybe this is a tangent. I was going to think to the extent that it goes poorly because people are just remembering stuff for the test, but not really internalizing it, then it's easy to think you'll get more of that from the students that weren't really that excited in the first place.
Right.
I think it also just forces us to like think about what degrees are supposed to mean. Right? Like they right now they play a role, like in the labor market, right? In that they're supposed to signal something, right? Maybe knowledge, maybe certain personal characteristics like grit or conscientiousness. And I am inclined to think in an AI world, just what a degree signals may be different. And so it may be that employers feel like they need different signals of
Yeah.
different characteristics than they could use in the past.
Yeah, I'm sure that's gonna be part of the question. I guess the other part is just like what degrees are also like, matter in the future. Like what can AI not do very efficient?
Yeah,
Um, and it's kind of interesting to see, kind of in the labor market, a lot of these major tech companies kind of just you know, lay off people for whatever reason. I know there's been debate about that, but it does make you question like, to what extent is like a computer scientist using so much AI that they're not really necessarily uh, utilizing the degree in the way that they may have been trained to.
yeah. I've got small kids, and yeah, for me, one of the biggest kind of long term questions is just what should they know, right? What
Yeah,
should they be learning?
right.
It kind of feels like for most of my life, you could kind of assume that the sort of skills, the sort of knowledge that had been useful in the past would be the same things in the future. And it just feels harder to assume that. Maybe it's still true, but but yeah, I don't know what the labor market in 20 years will care about.
Yeah. I mean, you hear a lot of people talk about kind of like, oh, trade skills, become a plumber or electrician. But I also think that people kind of underestimate how fast this technology could change and develop further. There's already lots of companies, working on building out, where you have these like humanoid robots that can perform various tasks. To me, it seems like even banking on a trade skill is maybe short term thinking. So
Yeah, yeah. I remember talking to another colleague of mine in the sciences, where he seemed convinced that very capable humanoid robots are just around the corner. He wasn't worried about this is a chemist for what it's worth. He wasn't worried about them figuring out how to run chemistry labs, so he didn't think he was in trouble. But he definitely thought plumbers were in trouble. I
yeah,
wasn't sure how
yeah,
seriously to take it.
yeah. It's interesting. So I mean, I guess then thinking the big picture as a philosopher, thinking about the future society, like what concerns do you have about AI beyond the education realm, just in general?
So, I mean, I'm just by disposition optimistic, maybe to a fault. So I, I have to say I'm not too worried about the kind of broadly like job displacement style worries. I don't think that's qua philosopher. That's maybe more qua interested consumer of economics.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And my sense is to the extent that we get technologies that do things that people used to do in the past, that doesn't mean the people who did those things don't have anything to do. There's these are kind of familiar points, but like there's a period where some huge percentage of American citizens were farmers, and we just get a lot better at farming, and that doesn't mean that all people have nothing to do because all they used to do farming. So yeah, I tend to think as long as we can find some things that we want people to do, then you don't get mass unemployment, but you do get a different world, and it's hard to so I don't know that this is a concern, but I just say my main kind of anxiety is the sense that it's hard. It feels harder to predict what the world 30 years from now might be than it did in say 1990. Like if you'd asked me, you know yeah, actually had a good time. Let's say 1995. Right? If you asked me like, what do you think the world will be like in 30 years? Well, I was in elementary school. Maybe I would have gotten a lot of stuff wrong, but it still feels to me like the kind of stuff that predictions I would have made, I would have been reasonably more confident of. Or if you just kind of took various lines in the 90s and extrapolated them out. Yeah, the internet was a thing in the mid 90s. It's going to be a bigger thing. You'd have been right about that. But I just feel less confident in my ability to do any of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been something that's interesting because, I mean, historically, there's always been quite a lot of failed predictions about the future. And, obviously, we hear kind of CEOs of major AI companies go back and forth about its impacts on whether it's jobs or other things. And I think that, I mean, that's just kind of a normal aspect where people are dealing with a lot of uncertainty when it comes to this technology, what's actually capable of. And also everyone's got kind of their own interests as well in terms of how they hype the technology and what they hope for it. So the mix between hope and what's realistic, I guess, or it's kind of hard to identify. Um, so
Yeah, 100. I mean, yeah, I'm certainly sensitive. Like some of the people I know who are more, who think it's overhyped, will point out that
yeah,
the main sources of wild predictions about what it will do in the future come from AI companies who both, in a sense, okay, they have the most inside information about just what the models are capable of, but obviously they also have an interest in driving investment, and it doesn't even have to be kind of nefarious or like intentional deception kind of thing. It's just probably AI companies select for people who are really bullish on what AI can do in a totally sincere way. So yeah, it's hard to. I don't think there's anybody who knows what the future is going to be like, and it's hard to even know who's trustworthy in terms of having better or worse judgment.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I guess but yeah, it seems like the main thing for society today when it comes to trying to grasp AI is just trying to understand like the roles it potentially could play in society, just to be as prepared as possible for how it potentially changes things. Because it is hard to gauge, yeah, what's gonna be like in 10 years from now. Um,
And
yeah,
I'll say one kind of happy thing, if you go like 15 years, before contemporary LLMs were on the scene, um, but at a point where there was still plenty of like futuristic speculation about artificial intelligence, there was a kind of worry that this is actually a prominent philosopher Nick Bostrom has this book Superintelligence,
yes,
and
right,
really like there's an argument in there that I think it dates back to I.J. Good, who's like a mid 20th century uh, decision theorist, philosopher, economist. A lot of people cite him, but he had this thought that once you have greater than human intelligence, you're going to very quickly have kind of runaway feedback loop because whoever designed the argument was roughly like whoever designed that greater than human intelligence, the best they can do was this thing that was a bit smarter than them, and so the best that thing can do in terms of designing intelligences should be a bit better than the best they can do, which is to say it should be a bit better than it is. And so like if the smartest humans, the best intelligence they can design is this smart, and the smartest intelligence this thing designed is going to be smarter than what the smartest humans can do. And
right,
you
right.
can formalize it, but the idea was that you very quickly get some kind of feedback loop off to infinity. That just seems not to be true. It seems like progress is like there are bottlenecks to progress that are not just how good the model is. You need to spend a lot of time and like electricity training models, and so my sense is we have more time to adapt than at least some of the most uh, out there predictions before we actually had it might have suggested, where the really thought was like, no, once you have super intelligence, it designs the smarter thing, and very, very quickly you get something capable of like autonomously making uh, who knows what sorts of interventions in the world. And that just doesn't feel like the world that we're seeing now. It seems like we've got a bunch of companies, they're competing, they're it's not like at any point overnight you find, wait, this area of the economy or of the world is just completely, autonomous now.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting to kind of know like, okay, what yeah, how is there like another like breaking point where there's some big breakthrough that drastically advances things further, or is it just something that's like, okay, we already had the breaking point and now we're just kind of building off of that, and it's gonna be a long time before there's another. That's the interesting thing is trying to gauge when it comes to like trying to predict like what's going to happen in the future with this. Um, Also, I wonder, like, as a philosopher, do you think that AI will eventually become smarter than people? But at the same time, what is that? What is that definition of intelligence then? So,
Yeah, I mean, I certainly one of the upshots of this whole period for me has been forcing me to tease apart different mental categories that I might have been inclined in the past to just think would all go together.
yeah,
Right? So you put that in terms of intelligence, right? Sometimes you hear people ask about consciousness, sometimes about other categories. I I'm inclined to think for, like, suppose you operationalize intelligence. Well, we have ways of operationalizing intelligence for people, right? We have IQ tests. I think they're already better than us at that, but that's not maybe that interesting,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
because, like, well, you kind of only cared about something like an IQ test because you thought scoring well on that correlated with various
right,
other things that are harder to measure. That
yeah,
where if you're doing well at the test, then you'll be doing well at those other things. And uh, with AIs, I think you can knock a bunch of tests out of the park. Right, pretty much any standardized test you can give to humans, AIs are beating us on now. Maybe not beating like the very best of us, but yeah, they're beating. They're doing great on Math Olympiad. They're doing great on
right,
LSATs, GREs, all that. So, like, if you want intelligence in an operationalizable sense, they're already really good at it. What are things that you might have thought of as like part of intelligence that, at least for now, they're not there yet? I was just reading a document from Anthropic the other day where it still seems like squishier stuff about like taste in research. And I'll say also in philosophy, this feels true to me. Like when I ask it really pointed questions, uh, what are challenges of holding this view and that view at the same time? It does a really good job of saying, well, here's what this view says, here's what that view says, drawing out their implications, seeing why, might be, if you say this, then you're probably going to say that, and that conflicts with accepting this view. They're really good at that kind of thing. But something more like, what's an interesting topic to write a paper on? Just like write me a new paper in this area. Um, granted, I haven't tried that much of it, maybe because I'm afraid of what I'd see. But when I have tried, I haven't been impressed. Um, it still feels to me like the theses they'll pick to defend, the topics they'll pick, just feel very like reheated leftovers.
yeah. That makes sense.
But I don't. It's not that I think there's some clear in principle barrier there. I'm very hesitant about positing those. So I just say, at least, like, that's something that now I'd think of as part of intelligence or creativity that where I don't think they're there quite yet. But check back with me in a year.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it does seem like it's more like skill based right now, where it can do things really fast. It can be much more productive than we can be in incredibly short periods of time. But in terms of like the critical thinking, obviously consciousness and maybe having the being able to not just have being able to make an ethical argument, but also have make an ethical argument in a way that is taking into account like what it's by understanding what's actually like to be a human being. Yeah, how you might communicate an idea will come across differently because you know how to connect with another human being versus perhaps just when you're talking to ChatGPT on the phone or something like that. It's obviously kind of all over the place a little bit, and the speaking version is much weaker, I would say, than the text version. Um, and obviously, how we communicate is very much based off of like the vibe you get from the tone and everything. So,
I've never used the speaking version, and
okay,
yeah,
yeah,
that's interesting to me. That uh, I'd be curious whether it can read tone in
I
a
would
voice.
say the speaking version is I dramatically more limited from my use of it. It just seems to uh, it's kind of like you're talking with a fancy like customer service bot or something. Like it can have a conversation with you, but you know it just seems like wow, this is it's just not really hanging on very tight to the
I
conversation.
was it. There are still places where the kind of inhumanity of it
Mm,
jumps out at me, where I'm like
yeah.
I'm reminded, oh wow, this is really not like us.
Right. Yeah.
And 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 it's mostly not in like philosophy related stuff. Mostly in philosophy related stuff, it's doing great. But the other day, so I do jujitsu, and I had I had a question that it still frustrates me. I had seen a technique on some video, like probably on YouTube or maybe on my Facebook feed. I'd seen a few videos where people did that, and I thought it was pretty cool. I didn't, but it was hard to describe, and I don't know if it has a canonical name. So just like trying to, and I couldn't find the videos that I'd seen before. So the task that I gave to a few different AI agents was basically trying to describe this as best I could in words, and then be pointed to either a name for it or
Right.
someplace
Yeah.
where I could look further stuff up. And it just did a terrible job of like it clearly had read lots of text about jujitsu
Yeah.
and could point me to things that, as far as I could tell, are clearly inconsistent with what I was describing. Um, in a way that made me it felt like to jujitsu with somebody who was blind and had never watched or participated in any, but had read a lot of it via braille. Be like, man,
Yeah.
you just can't even, you don't have
Yeah.
what it takes to enter into this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it seems like ChatGPT in many ways is just like a or these large language models are like like these search engines on steroids that can communicate with you, that can just harbor all this knowledge and then spit it out to you as if a person was writing it. But you could definitely see the lack of self awareness and it not being human in many respects. Uh, so that's why I guess what's interesting to me when we talk about like, okay, what is intelligence? Because the idea of super intelligence would to me seem like something that would be beyond human and not at all like what we're seeing today, not even close. Like you just like it's just on totally another level that you can't really grasp what that is until you see it kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think what brings out to me is, we use this one word intelligence, and I think with humans, it's because there are these various different tasks where being good at one is good evidence that you're going to be good at another one. And so it makes sense to just have one word that kind of vaguely refers to that whole cluster. And with artificial, at least with contemporary AI, large language model style intelligences, it's just the correlations between what tasks they're good at and what tasks they're not good at. It's just not like the human ones. And so I think there's a kind of conceptual mistake in trying to
Yes,
ask how smart they are. Um,
yes. That's that. I've had the same thing because it seems to me when I see people describe super intelligence, like the definitions that AI companies put out or other people in the AI space, it seems to me that they're describing just like some type of super capability of being able to perform a task in a way that's potentially very dangerous. For example, like they talk about loss of control. For, if AI just goes rogue, but to me, it's not going rogue based off the idea that it's like self-aware, like oh, I've gone rogue, and I'm gonna do all these things based off of what I believe to be true, but rather just based off of like programming almost, like it's programming itself, optimizing things based on what it thinks is the best outcome, but not out of some logical moral framework or anything.
yeah, I still, I mean, I guess we do have these coding agents now that can do more
Yeah.
autonomously than
Yep.
before. So you can imagine kind of Sorcerer's Apprentice style scenarios where, if given access to enough stuff, they screw things up. Though, yeah, I still can't really, and maybe this is, should I say, can't imagine. It doesn't feel to me like we're on the path to you know agents that really are like properly describable as having their own goals
Yeah.
that conflict with human goals, where like kind of Skynet or Ultron is the right kind of analogy. Maybe I'm being too unimaginative and thinking that we're not on that path, but it doesn't feel like it to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that's, I think, fascinated me most about AI is just there's so much uncertainty that you have just so many different people with different views on what's gonna happen, and I'm somewhat just agnostic about I don't really I don't have any idea what's gonna happen with it. Obviously, the risks, should be taken seriously, but also the benefits, and how do we sort of pin and point, okay, what's the right path for this? Um, but it is kind of crazy. So I guess then I'd want to finish off asking you, so if you're thinking about this moment today that you're living in as a philosopher, you know, what would you want people to understand about this moment? Like historians 20, 30, 100 years from now, if you wanted to describe what it feels like to be in this moment, being in your profession.
Yeah, good. I mean, it's so tricky because what message what you'd really like is to know the future and then
Right, of
frame it
course.
appropriately, right?
So,
Because if AI turns out to be as big a deal as you kind of imagined, then you'd kind of like one message that I'd like to leave is like, can you believe people were so worried about like politics right now,
yeah, yeah.
that like actually this was
Yeah.
but
You're
if it turns out to be as not as transformative as you might imagine, then maybe I
you want
just want to say this was a time when people thought that they might be dealing with a technology as transformative as electricity.
yeah, you're a prisoner to your historical context, unfortunately. So, yeah. Yeah, I think everyone wants to have like what's that right take, but yeah, that's the question. We don't know, I guess. So, well, what are you currently working on then, and what's the best way for people to keep track of your work?
Well, I've got a Substack. It's actually at Greco and Wansley. Wansley is Matt Wansley is a friend of mine, a law professor. But honestly, I do almost all of the posting. I kind of
That's
rip him
mostly
about that from time to time. Um, but yeah, that's where I do popular facing writing, and I should have something up there. I don't know. I'm traveling for another couple weeks, so not super soon, but sooner or later.
yeah, great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, to share your perspective on all these changes happening, as well as giving some insight into like this world of AI training. So,
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for having me on.
uh,